a war of words between the Nationals and the Greens. The Greens have been taking aim at what they say is the government inaction on climate change. Michael McCormack hit back in a fiery interview this morning.
Well, they don't need the ravings of some pure, enlightened and woke capital city greenies at this time when they're trying to save their homes, when in fact they're going out in many cases and saving other people's homes and leaving their own homes at risk. What they don't need is Adam Bandt and Richard Di Natale trying to get a political point score on this. I mean, it is disgraceful, it is disgusting, and I'll call it out every time. We're not going to shut down an industry, say coal. I appreciate that Glenn Innes Mayor has made comments, but she hasn't asked for entire industries to be shut down. That's what Adam Bandt and the Greens and Richard Di Natale and all those other inner city raving lunatics, and quite frankly, that's how he was carrying on yesterday.
Joining me now for more on this is Greens MP Adam Bandt. Thanks for your time today.
Good afternoon.
What's your message, first of all, to people out there in fire-affected regions?
We're watching. Everyone around the country is devastated by what we're seeing, and people are thinking of you and lending our support to the people who are not only in the line of the fire and having risk to their life and property, but also everyone who is out there putting their lives on the line trying to fight it as well. But thoughts and prayers are not enough. We need action and science as well. This is about protecting life, and it's about whether the government can say with its hand on its heart that it's done everything it can to minimise the risk of these catastrophic fires and to prepare Australia for these fires that they were warned about. And the answer on both counts is no, which means the government, Michael McCormack and Scott Morrison, are putting lives at risk, and we need to call that out and to hope that this is a wake-up call for them and that they change tack and start addressing the climate emergency.
Sheeting home blame, though, even if you were to accept all the various steps of climate change and responsibility and so on, it's got to be very minimal, doesn't it, considering Australia's emissions, 1.7%, overall global emissions have some impact on ferocity and frequency of bushfires now and going forward. This sort of apportioning of blame would be very minimal, wouldn't it, if you had to come up with a percentage term?
No, I mean, we've always had bushfires in this country. We've always been a land of drought and flooding rain. So the question is, why the hell would you wish to make them worse? Why the hell would you wish more of them on us? Now, the government has been warned for well over 30 years, but most recently by former fire chiefs who tried to get in the door to see Scott Morrison to say something is coming, and it's not even summer yet, something is coming towards the end of the year and you've got to take action. And he dismissed them. They wanted to get in the door and say, we are not prepared for these kind of catastrophic fires, and he dismissed them. People have been trying to put him and the government on notice that there are things the government could do to minimise the risk.
But this would be
done the opposite.
This is about Australia from the point of view even of scientists within climate change and advocating for more action, just doing our small bit.
So let's look at that. When you take into account the amount of coal that we export, on some reckonings, we're the world's 6th largest polluter. We are not a minnow here.
That's also an assumption that if we didn't,
the climate crisis.
That'd be an assumption as well, that if we didn't export that coal, there would not be a single emission otherwise. That's not the case either, is it?
The scientists are pretty clear. We signed up to the Paris Agreement. The scientists, as part of that, told us last year a very, very simple truth. We've already warmed by a degree. We could hit catastrophic tipping points of 1.5 degrees as soon as 2030. If we want to minimise that risk, then the world needs to be at least 2/3 out of coal by 2030.
Isn't that the key, the world?
And that includes Australia as one of the most coal-addicted countries, and we are the drug pusher.
What, for example, the US is doing and Donald Trump's intention to pull out of Paris completely overshadows.
And so we shouldn't be following it. And instead you've got Scott Morrison.
We're not following
saying,
it, though. We're not pulling out of Paris.
Scott Morrison says it's negative globalism when the rest of the world tells us to cut our pollution more. No, it's science saying that if you don't want people's lives at risk, if you don't want people's homes at risk, then we have to get out of coal. Now, we can't, as Australia, go and point the finger at other countries and say, well, you should be doing more, if we're not prepared to do it ourselves.
But our own energy mix, for example, is the 3rd highest renewables mix in the world.
we are overwhelmingly addicted to coal. Coal is still the main source of energy, and we need a plan to get out of coal and onto renewables. Renewables now, we're fortunate to be blessed with so much sun and wind, and that's why those figures are changing.
Scientists would also say that transition is difficult. Some countries, and other countries, for example, one of the other top three for renewables has a lot of nuclear in the mix. That's Germany. It's low carbon, but the Greens won't consider that.
Well, Germany has just had the equivalent of their Liberal and Labor parties come up with a plan to get out of coal, and they're in the process of getting out of nuclear as well. They are shifting to renewables. Now, we've got a government that is in complete denial, and it is putting people...
It's still a government that's shifting to renewables as well.
No, it's tried to get rid of the renewable energy target. The things that are
that's a previous incarnation.
In renewables,
I mean, that wasn't Scott Morrison at the helm.
Well, the renewable energy target runs out next year, and the government's got nothing to replace it with. Now, when you cuddle coal in Canberra, the rest of the country burns. Right?
Well,
it is. If Scott Morrison, he can't have it both ways. We can either have a safer climate, or we can continue to spruik coal, but we can't have both.
Isn't your disappointment really with the Australian voters? Scott Morrison's doing what he said he would.
Scott Morrison is misleading people by telling them that the climate crisis is under control. You'll notice that his rhetoric, he understands now that people are, whether you're in the inner city or you're in the country in our regions, people understand that the climate change is reaching crisis point. What he says to them is, oh, look, trust me, it's okay, I've got it under control.
What he was saying during the campaign
is that he does not have it under control.
What he was saying during the campaign was, here's our 26% reduction target. Labor's got a bigger one. He didn't hide from that. And theirs won't be affordable, and voters weighed that up.
And when he said 26%, he also said that that will play our part in stopping dangerous global warming, but it won't. Like, not everyone has the time to sit down and read the IPCC reports. They take it on faith.
So you're saying voters were misled because they were told, and a lot of people was spruiking that this was going to be a climate election.
They were told by the government that the government had the climate crisis under control, and Scott Morrison clearly does not have the climate emergency under control. His targets are consistent with the world warming by about 3.5 degrees. That means the scenes that we are seeing now become a regular feature of
voters
Australian
knew
life.
that there was a more ambitious policy from Labor, and they didn't support it. Do you blame the voters at all? Are they not taking this seriously enough?
Scott Morrison was out there saying, look, it's okay, you can have my targets and climate change will be under control. And now we are seeing, in the worst possible way, that is simply not true.
But what about voters? Do they carry the can at all for this?
Well, voters are entitled to look to people like...
Did they disappoint you with their vote?
No, voters are entitled to look to people like the Prime Minister and presume that the Prime Minister isn't lying to them. They're entitled to look to people like the Prime Minister and presume that when he says he's got global warming under control, that it's true, but it's not.